We've got 7 o'clock. Please stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I do want to make sure everyone understands we do have one board member. Mr. Dalby is here via remote, so if you hear somebody talking and you don't see us moving our lips, it'll be coming from him. Okay. Section 2. I move that we approve the agenda and consent agenda. I'm going to make a modification to the agenda. I'm going to add section 7.4 for a discussion of participating in executive session via remote access or call-in, and the following donations to the high school for $100 from Jeffrey Pittman to the football program, $250 from EOG Resources to Stednica Scholarship Fund, $80 from the Popcorn Pit Stop to Positive Communication for helping out with the homecoming booth, $355 from silent auction donations to the music theater, $1,365 from the Leavenworth County Scholarship Pageant to the Drama Club, $1,116 from the car wash donations to the band boosters, $890 from the Pink Out donations to volleyball, and $162.74 services donated for the billboard lease for the band booster holiday market. Can I get a second? You get additional discussion? All in favor? Aye. John, you're going to have to yell aye for yours.
Aye.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Hearings from the audience, we have 4. So we rolled them all into 1 month. So Janice, you're up first. If you can please, just come to the mic so everybody can hear.
What I'm talking about, or asking about is your policy on a student being in a hospital and that is in choir and they're passing choir prior to being placed in the hospital, and because they're in the hospital, they're unable to attend their choir concert. And then when they get back out of the hospital and are able to attend back to school, the second semester has now begun. Therefore, nothing was made available for the student to be able to make up the missing concert, therefore resulting in the child failing choir, but yet was passing choir prior to the concert and prior to going into the hospital. And I feel that's not fair, because if the child would have moved prior to the choir concert, moved schools, his grade would have been a passing grade, and therefore would have retained his credit for that semester for choir. So, I guess that's what I'm saying now,
Janice, I'll be more than happy to look into that again for you and report back on what the administration has found on the different layers of that, because we have many different layers of policy there that you're questioning about the student being in the hospital, and makeup assignments, I think, is a big part of that.
Yeah, there was no makeup because he was no longer in choir. And
It's
everybody
probably,
I talked to, I was directed back to you guys.
Yeah.
You guys were the only ones that could reinstate his credit for it.
so it's probably a conversation you and I need to have again, probably set up a meeting and not talk over the phone, and actually sit down. And I'd like to do my homework beforehand, and make sure that I ask all the administration involved with that beforehand, and get the exact details of that.
Okay.
Before we talk. I think we do a lot better talking in person than over the phone, because then we can lay out the things that they've said also.
So will you contact me on?
Yes. Yep,
Okay.
I have to check my schedule. And I'd hope to do that this week. So, okay?
All right, thank you.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Stuart.
Hi, my name is Stuart Lyon. Had the privilege of having 6 of my 8 children graduate from Lansing High School. And we moved here 25 years ago because of the quality of education and the values. And the problem that I'm speaking today is about concern about the quality of required readings for the high school. It's disturbing to me that things that I view as obscene and lacking in any literary merit are being required of all the students to read. Several parents came to me and asked me about things, and having reviewed the board policy, what is happening at the high school now is in violation of board policy. Parents are being told that on an individual basis, a particular reading assignment can be substituted for another reading assignment. They're not told about challenging materials. They're given a form for opting out of religious activities instead of the challenge form, and are very frustrated. So there's 2 parts of this. One is that board policy is not being followed. The other part is that a parent finds out when the child brings something home that something is about to be studied by the student. The process of challenging, meeting with the superintendent, a possibility of the school board appointing a review committee, the review committee reporting back, decision by the school board about we're going to withdraw this material when there is a lot of material, not all of it certainly, but a lot of material that I would find objectionable. The parent is playing defense without any possibility of, for their child during this semester, having them not have to do that assignment. The high school right now, the English department, is trying to have individual parents satisfied by substituting something else, but that's not what the board policy says. So we'd like to have board policy followed, but in addition, we'd like to have, in addition to the board policy on textbooks and instructional materials, that parents are told at the beginning of the year what they are so they can review them, and those things that they find objectionable, they can make the challenge according to current board policy. What's happening now is that the youth goes to high school class, is handed something, finds it's awful, but there isn't any process there to have prevented that from happening, involving the parent. So that's the 2 things. Board policy is not being followed, and there's not an ability of the parent to look at things beforehand and go through a process so that that is not going to be assigned to their student. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cindy.
I'm Cindy Grisham, and I had a prepared statement, but I'd like to just give that to you so you don't have to listen to me. And I have 2 examples of what Mr. Lyon is talking about in here. And if I asked one of you to read this, who would like to read the first one? It's very short. It's less than 2 minutes.
We don't plan on reading that in front of you today, but we will take the material and look at it.
Okay. I asked the principal to read it, and he said, no, you go ahead and read it. And I was very uncomfortable reading it, and students have come to me after having read this pornographic material and then disturbed. So the pornographic one is on top, and the beginning of the second one that I have for you to read is pornographic and disgusting. I'll read it out loud to you.
Well,
But if you're filming this,
I would
you
prefer
don't
not
want,
if we can read this.
but
so
this
you
is
can get
what
your
our
example.
students are having to read. Just read the first I posted this on a website, and I was banned from the website because it was pornographic.
Thank you for sharing the material. Do you want to read that now, or do you want to read? Next one? Okay. Andrew?
My name is Andrew Johnson. I'm a parent, got students going to school, and I just wanted to more or less echo what the other parents have said prior to this. Just from a a personal perspective, I remember the day I came home from work and my wife was all in tears and my kids were in tears. And I can't believe they're making us read this for school. And I read through some of it, and I could not believe some of the material that was in there. I kept asking myself, what value is there making them read the swear words, the body parts, the activities and whatnot that are just not of value? And I had to say, what is my kid going to learn from this? Is there anything edifying, uplifting about this? And I'm not going to say, well, let's all go out and watch G-rated movies forever. I mean, that's not what the point is. It's the fact that someone in a position of authority approved it and said, yes, children should read this because it's really wholesome and should uplift them and make them better people. There's nothing about what I read my student bringing home that was uplifting and had any business in their lives. And I wonder if you guys even know what's being approved at the school. I hear the school saying, oh, we have permission from the board, that we have their backing. And then I find that the board doesn't know what's going on, but they say, well, the teachers are allowed to select materials. Somebody has to be accountable. And if you read the material, and I'm guessing that you've got a couple of copies there, I'm not sure you feel comfortable having your kids read it either. I'm just frustrated that this is allowed, and it seems like no one is aware that it's going on. So anything you can do about that, I'm very grateful about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do appreciate the group bringing that information to our attention. So, thank you. We're at one. Mr. Long, you're up.
My name is Jim Long, and I'm at Carlin and Long CPAs. My firm came out and took a look at books and records for the prior fiscal year for the district. I think you all have a hard copy of the audit there. If I want to take a look past that first page and past the table of contents, is the independent auditor's report. And the first page says there's some management responsibilities as well as auditor responsibilities. The second page, second paragraph, it's an adverse opinion in accordance with GAAP because these financial statements are in accordance with the Kansas Municipal Audit Guide, which is what the Department of Education requires. The next paragraph down says it's unmodified in accordance with that basis, so there's no problems or concerns regarding the financial statements in this format. Take a look at page 4. Sort of the overview. The funds are down the left-hand side there. You can see all the beginning balances, cash receipts and expenditures, the ending cash. Been pointing out this year down there at the bottom, the bond and interest amount. Obviously, that's not really money that you have available to spend on kind of anything. It's pretty much tied into what the bonds are going to be coming right around the corner, right, every 6 months. So take a look at the totals down there. Bond and interest isn't necessarily yours. In the lower right-hand corner is where that money's held. I think one bank sweep account type of thing. That is the financial statement. You can see the balances pretty much stay the same all around. The notes of the financial statements are the next section of the audit. They're a narrative description of policies and procedures. Take a look at page 13 at note 5. We have an instance where there's a requirement that the bond money is transferred to the state and received at the state 20 days before the bonds are due. And when I got the confirmation back from the state, it said that that was not the case here. And I started looking back through, and it was actually 14 days before they were due. So it's like, is this really a big thing? But, as far as 20 days, typically what I've seen lately is that the board meeting doesn't necessarily happen either before that gets sent around. But to me, it's one of those that if it can be approved in the, as a regular payment at the prior board meeting to be done when necessary, then that would take care of the state's requirement for that 20 days.
Is there any penalty for that?
There's not. Just non-compliance
It
issue.
was paid on time, I just didn't realize that money would be transferred into the MIP. I had no idea about the 20 days, he didn't either. 20-day rule, I guess
Once it comes up, and it's like, well, what is that then?
Yeah.
I just imagine the superintendent probably would mess with a letter from Dale and say, don't have this happen again type of thing.
Right. We can just look to adjust our piece on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Be in compliance.
If you look at page 14, note 9, as far as interfund transactions, a lot of the money comes in from the general fund or the supplemental general fund, and then you can see the quantities that are transferred out for each of the other particular funds. These for last year. If you look at page 16, which is landscape, that's a summary of the long-term debt for any refinancing. But you can see the payments are just kind of going along. Various bond issues are still kicking around. A couple have dropped off in the past couple of years. But the section down at the bottom, every 5 years, the principal on top and the interest on below. We'll look at the total. On page 17, this one's required for KMAG for the state. It basically asks, what was the budget authority that was approved? Second column to the end is the expenditures that are actually spent from all the particular funds. All those on the right-hand column, as far as the variance goes, if there's zero up there, especially for general and supplemental, that means everything was spent or transferred to other funds. So the state's not going to ask for anything back regarding any of those. All the other ones are negative, which is actually underspending your budget by those amounts, which is a good thing. If they were positive, then we have a budget violation as well. The next several pages are comparisons of budget and actual for all the particular funds. And typically, as I flip through there, the receipts over or under expenditure down there at the bottom kind of gives you an idea of whether those funds are going up or down. But on page 32, those are the non-budgeted funds. Typically, those are federal funds, special assessments on page 33. That fund is there. 34 is the amount that is held at the schools themselves as far as activity funds, agency accounts. 36 kind of gives you an idea of how much money is in those accounts, as well as whether they're going up or down. Beyond that are the federal program reports for that. We did test some federal compliance issues since you have more than $750,000 of federal funds. If you look at page 41, buried in there a little
There
bit.
you go. Go back a page.
It's after the reports, but it's a listing of the federal funds that the district received. Since that was more than 750,000, we took a look at a couple of programs for particular compliance issues. And had no issues as far as compliance with federal programs. Got a loose page at the front, a loose letter at the front. It's a letter from me to the governing body. Take a look about 3/4 of the way down there. It says difficulties encountered in performing the audit. We came up, everything was available and ready for us. Didn't have any concerns as far as that goes when we showed up. Tried to do a little more pre-planning this time around too, so we had more information available when we did arrive, as opposed to us doing extra work while we were here, and then delaying the process for the staff to get this information. So we try to get some of that information ahead of time. And the other matters on page 2, if there was any other thing in particular, we put it down there, but that's pretty much just talking about the required supplemental information for KMAG, which is all those extra fund reports, but nothing else. That's a quick tour through the audit.
Anybody have any questions, concerns?
So I asked you the same question last year and 2 years ago. Are we doing better than we were 3 years ago when we blew $7 million?
I'd say yes.
I look at this, I value this every year that you come, so I make sure we're doing things right, things are accountable, and
I appreciate that.
pass the audit, so I appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity to. As well.
I think it's important too, Danielle, for preparing all the documents that end up in the audit. And then the other part is from the last end of the week report, all those fund balances and things, you start to see those ones come on for me, and just how we're doing our projections, Danielle and I are working on.
We can state also, see.
Yes.
How much cash do you have?
Exactly.
Any additional questions? I move that we approve the 2018-2019 CPA audit as presented.
Second.
Additional discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, John, sir.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Everybody have an opportunity to review the leaf reports and the administration reports. Any questions, concerns there? All right. 7.1, ASB superintendent search. Mr. Jordan, you're up.
All right.
Okay.
Oh.
We got extras.
We got two.
There's some extra ones right here. Okay, good evening. I'm Brian Jordan with the Kansas Association of School Boards. With me this evening is Dr. Marshall Wiesman, and we are going to be the search team that leads your superintendent search process. Tonight, what we're going to accomplish, hopefully, is make sure that you all are familiar with the search process and answer any questions that you have at this point. We also have a proposed timeline that we would like to finalize so that we can start marketing and moving forward with some key steps in that search process. So that'll be kind of the last thing that we walk through tonight. So in front of you, you all have a copy now of what we call the Superintendent Resource Book. And anytime that we're talking about the superintendent search, We'd encourage you to bring your copy of this back. This is yours, obviously. You can mark it up, put notes in it wherever you see fit. But this has all kinds of examples of schedules and forms and documents that are meant to kind of give you an idea of what key steps of this search process can look like. Your clerk will have access to electronic copies of all those things. We'll send those to her tomorrow after we've walked through some of those tonight. And then you'll want to take those and kind of make them your own. And obviously, we don't need those as you work through those forms and ideas. But what I'd like to do tonight is kind of walk through some key information that's in here to get you thinking about what some questions might be that you have about our search process, and really highlight some of the key steps that have to occur for a good, thorough search for your next superintendent. So I'd like you to flip over to page 4, and it just starts off there at the top. It talks about overview for selecting a superintendent. And we like to tell boards there's really kind of 4 phases to a superintendent search. And so you'll see there's tabs sticking out to the side that indicate each of those 4 phases. We're really in phase 1 right now, which is just simply marketing and establishing the timeline, or starting to put marketing material together and establishing the timeline for your search process. When we transition into phase 2, that's when the search actually gets posted and people can begin to apply. But as a Board of Education, that's the time where you start to put your heads together around interview questions that you would like to ask, and we start to collect feedback from your community and stakeholders and working with you as a board to identify what the priorities are that you would like to see in your next superintendent. When you get to phase 3, that is actually the interviewing of the candidates being shown around your district, and then the final stage, which is phase 4, is actually the hiring and then the onboarding process. And so the hiring process, obviously, that's you coming together after you've conducted interviews, putting together what you feel is a fair offer to your superintendent candidate, and then settling that contract and ratifying that contract with the candidate. And then we come back and work with you as a board with your new superintendent, what we call an onboarding meeting, where we get you on the same page with your new superintendent and off to a great start with that new superintendent. So I want to walk through some key steps that happen in each of those phases tonight. If you're happen to thumb through this book, you'll notice that at the front of each one of those phases, there's kind of a checklist of key events that happen. Starting on page 5 is just general information, kind of the overview, and I'll try to link those to those different phases. So really some key things to start off with is consideration of internal candidates. Obviously, you have an interim superintendent that's in place right now. We don't have to have a conversation tonight about how you would like to handle internal candidates, but what we tell boards is you do need to give some thought of how you want to inform and communicate with those internal candidates. Probably the most common option that we see with internal candidates and boards is that they want the internal candidate to apply and be considered in the pool with every other candidate that's applied. That's the most common. But there occasionally are times where the board says, we have internal candidates, but we know we have to go outside of the district because they're seeking something different. And so we can help communicate that to the internal candidates if that's your desire. But again, that's not a decision that you have to make tonight. We can have further discussion about that topic when we come back at any one of the meetings that we have coming up in the future with the board. So as you flip over to page 6, one of the things that I always remind boards of as you get into any search process is confidentiality is critical. You will have access to people's professional resumes and personal information, and you're going to have insights about some of their professional experiences and some of their background. We encourage you to maintain confidentiality with the candidate's information, just like you would if you when you have access to your teachers or your administrators' information within your district. There will be a point in time that we recommend that you do share publicly who you're going to be interviewing, but as far as what's discussed during the interview, the responses that are shared during the interview, that is confidential information, because there may be things shared that you don't want the public to necessarily know, or the candidate doesn't want the public to necessarily know about those things. Another key thing about the confidentiality is at some point when we meet with you to talk about candidates that have applied, we'll talk about kind of the timing of releasing some of those names and sharing that information. There's a potential if there are leaks or if information gets out too early, it can scare candidates off because they want to be able to share with their community the right timing for who, for applying for these other jobs. So let's just touch on some of the key things in the first phase, which is kind of where we're at tonight with your superintendent search.
So right now, we're in the process of putting together your timeline. We have a proposed timeline we'll be talking about here in just a few minutes. We've also been in contact with your clerk, and she's been working with our assistant in our office to put together some marketing material. There's examples of the marketing material, and obviously they're in the brochure. The key things that are in the resource here are the brochure typically, or the marketing material typically has a profile of your district, some budgetary information, some key highlights, goals that you have within your district, and that's used to kind of share with the candidates kind of an overview of here's some things that are priorities and here's what the district looks like. We tell boards that if somebody is interested in your district, they're going to do their homework. They're going to research you. In fact, your former superintendent maybe gets a phone call, or even your current superintendent gets a phone call from potential candidates seeking information. We often will get phone calls from candidates asking us, what do we know about this community? What do we know about this board? And so we're a resource in helping candidates learn more about your district as well. The marketing of your vacancies, some key things that happen once we get the job posted. It gets posted on our website. It also gets posted on the United School Administrators website, Teaching Jobs in Kansas website, and then we also have an affiliation with 40 other school board associations across the nation to cross-market their openings. So if you go to our website right now and look at our website where the vacancies are, you'll see Kansas jobs and Kansas searches that we are facilitating, but you'll also see other states' school board association searches that are being facilitated. We found that that's been a new development in the last few years with our association with these other school board associations, and has really helped get a more broad exposure of your job out there around the nation. We also have relationships with those other school board associations which help us gather information and research candidates that may apply for your job. Some other things to consider as we transition into phase 2 preparation for interviews. I'm right here at the bottom of page 6 now. One of the key things that we highly recommend as part of your search process is conducting what we call characteristic forums or focus groups, where we come to your community and we meet with stakeholders within your community and ask them 4 questions. And the 4 questions that we ask them are, what are the most important personal and leadership qualities that a superintendent needs to possess to be successful in this community and the school district? The second question that we ask the focus group is, what are the strengths and points of pride of the school district and community that a new superintendent coming in needs to support and get behind so that they can have success in this district? The third question that we ask the focus group is, what are the critical issues that must be addressed as the superintendent starts the job July 1? And we tell the focus groups it's not everything under the sun that you want them to fix over their tenure in your district, but those things starting July 1 that they need to gain an understanding of very quickly and start to learn about very quickly to have success. And the final and 4th question that we ask the focus groups is, what is the most important leadership or personal quality that would separate 2 really highly qualified candidates? Let's say you go through the interview process, you have 2 candidates setting their very similar experiences. What would be the most important single leadership or personal quality that would put one of those candidates above the other? So we do those with focus groups throughout your community, and then we bring all that information back to you as the board, and then we work through a very similar process with you as a board to prioritize, okay, so what are the most important leadership and personal qualities that the board agrees we need to be looking for in the next superintendent? What are the critical issues that the board sees out of all this information that we've collected, all the experiences that you have as board members, that we need to prioritize for that new superintendent coming in? So that's an important step in that phase 2, because what that does is it also helps you start to define what are the important questions that we need to be asking about in the interview process, and it kind of gives you your foundation for the interview questions to develop. It also helps us in the process as we do research on candidates and we look into their background and their work experience. We're looking to see, do they have background that match up with those things that the board has prioritized as important for their next candidate that they would like to hire for superintendent. So that's kind of the heavy lifting that happens in phase 2, to start to develop the interview questions, the meeting with the characteristic groups and the focus groups. Something else that we've started to do more frequently in the last couple of years with districts in this phase is put out an online survey with very similar questions. It has to be structured a little bit different because it's an online form, but it's the same 4 questions, just structured a little differently. The critical issues is an open-ended question. and the single leadership quality is an open-ended question. So you'll get a chance to really see what your community is valuing through an online platform as well. And that gets brought to you as the board table, and we go through that process. That's been something that's really gathered a lot of steam over the last couple of years, and boards have really liked that addition for collecting feedback from the community. I'll pause there. Are there any questions at this point or thoughts that you have?
Some of us have been through that a few times, so.
Yeah. Some of this should probably sound familiar based on past history. So, some other key things that happened during the phase 2 of the process. Applications are coming into our office. I'm kind of transitioning over to phase 7. Applications are coming into our office during this time. The applications come in via an online application system. All of our team members, which there's 7 of us that work on searches over the course of or across the state, we all review all applications. So we're all looking at what the applications are that are coming in. We're researching them. We're using our connections with boards across the state, with other administrators across the state, to try to find out what this person's work experiences are and if they're going to be a good fit for your board. So that's all happening as those applications come in. Transitioning then over to page 8. When we get to the end of phase 2, we come back and meet with the board in a meeting that we call the screening meeting, or the sharing of candidates meeting, where we're going to bring all the applicants that have applied for your job to a board meeting, and then we're going to go through those applications, all those applications with the board. That is a board meeting that's done in executive session, because that's when we're really talking about the personal stories, experiences that these people have. That's an opportunity for you to ask us questions about candidates. But that's really kind of the last step of phase 2. The way we have your search scheduled here, we'll talk about that in 2 minutes. That meeting would be happening somewhere in early February, and sharing those candidates in early February with you as a board. You will see all the applicants of everybody that's applied for the job. In that screening meeting, what we typically do is go through all the applicants, and then we spend more time talking about applicants that are what we call above the line. So you gave us criteria and qualities that you want. We'll do the research on these candidates, and then in that screening meeting or sharing of candidates meeting with the board, we're going to spend more time talking about what we know about those candidates that fall above that line. And so you'll have a pretty good understanding of who those people are. At the end of that board meeting, we leave, and then you all decide, okay, of the people that they talked about, which ones do we want to interview? How many do we want to interview? And ultimately, we're there in that mode as a support. We're not involved in your interviews, but we're just there to help you facilitate a fair, honest, ethical interview process at that point. So that kind of wraps up phase 2, and then you transition into phase 3, which is your interview. So during the phase 2 of the process, you will have constructed your interview questions. We have a bank of questions that are a starting point. We'll encourage you and we'll support you as you write your questions, to build those questions around those characteristics and qualities that you developed or that we helped you prioritize. And then you're going to use those to go through the interview process. The interview process is a very grueling process, to say the least, and very time consuming. When you go through the interview process, we encourage you to conduct 1 interview a day. Typically those happen in the evening. So your commitment as board members is to be present at those interviews, and we encourage all 7 board members to be present at those events. And like I said, it's 1 interview per evening. Each interview is actually a special board meeting that stands alone. You'll convene the board, go into an executive session to conduct your interview. The interview will typically last anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. We try to encourage boards not to go over that 3-hour time limit, because at the end of about 2 hours, everybody starts to get worn down, and you start to get a little cloudy, and you start to maybe lose your focus and attention to that candidate and their thoughts. So that's what the interviews actually look like, but there's some other things that happen during this phase. The candidates are going to be coming to your community. So we encourage the board to consider putting together a schedule for the candidate to tour your district and tour your community. So typically, in a district your size, the candidate would probably arrive somewhere in the morning, have a tour of the facilities in the morning, possibly do lunch with district office staff or administrative staff, and then complete their tour of the community or the schools in the afternoon. Another key piece that we encourage boards to put into place is to have a community open house or a meet and greet somewhere late afternoon. Typically that happens as people are getting off of work and teachers are off of work. And it's just an opportunity for community members and people to come and meet the person and put a name and a face together. Because in this phase, this would be the first time that a name actually gets shared publicly about Susan Smith has come into town to interview. Here's her schedule for the day. There's an opportunity for the public to meet Susan Smith at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, whatever time you choose. And then that evening is when you will actually conduct your interview with the candidate. Questions? Okay. Good. So you'll go through the interview process. I typically will get the question, well, how many people are we going to interview? A district of your size, I would anticipate 4 to 5. I would not encourage you probably to interview more than 5, because then you're starting to really tax your own time and your attention to detail. We'd encourage you to try to pare it down a little more than, get it less than 5, just because it's a labor-intensive process. You're going to be exhausted, honestly, after you get through the interview process, because you're going to spend a whole lot of time with one another. But sitting through a 2-hour interview with the candidate is very taxing on you mentally as well as physically. So you're going to go through the interview process. At the conclusion of the final interview, we would encourage you to get back together as soon as you possibly can as a board to do your deliberations. When you do your deliberations of who is our top candidate, we're going to ask you, or we encourage you to choose your top 2 candidates. And the reasoning behind that is if there would happen to be a fall through or something fall through with that number 1, you can immediately go to try to secure your second candidate. As you go through the deliberation process, there's a structure that we encourage you to use that helps you focus on those qualities and those characteristics that are the most important that you prioritize back in phase 2 with us. So what we will encourage you to do is take and list what are those top characteristics and qualities. So let's say a great communicator, let's say somebody with experience with technology, or let's say somebody with experience with curriculum development. List those qualities and then individually rank the candidates against those qualities. The reasoning behind that is if somebody comes in that's very charismatic, very flashy with the interview, boards have been known to maybe not see everything that they need to see, but get taken by somebody's personal presentation. So using those qualities and characteristics helps to guard a little bit against some of what we call the halo effect, somebody coming in and just wowing you with their charisma and their personality, and maybe not necessarily having the depth and the qualities that you actually like to see. So going through that process, you'll have your deliberations. You'll decide what's a salary range that we would be willing to pay for these top 2 candidates. You will know the salaries of everybody that's applied for this job. You'll also receive salary information based on your size of the district, your region, as well as your UNISER, which is another 30 districts in your area, and then also your league. We give you that information. It will be the next time that we come to meet with you, so you have good data to look at. Okay, what do we need to pay to get this person to come to our district? What are we willing to pay compared to what we're paying now? There's all kinds of conversations that you're going to have to decide as you go through those deliberations. And what we tell boards is you're going to have to pay the person to come, meaning that if they're making $110,000 over here, you're not going to get them for $110,000 in your district. The expectation would be that you're probably going to have to pay them. They know what you're paying roughly now. It's public information that's out there, and so that's something that you'll have to work through as you go through the deliberation process. So that gets us into phase 4, the hiring and the negotiations process. So when the board has decided on the top 2 candidates, typically there's a board member appointed to be the person that extends the offer to the candidate, and they've been given some leeway to negotiate up to a certain amount. That candidate then, once that amount has been agreed upon, terms of contracts have been agreed upon, what we tell boards is give them 24 hours to get a signed copy of that contract back to you. And then as a board, you'll need to come together at a special meeting to ratify that contract. And that will be when you get to publicly announce who the candidate or who the next superintendent of Lansing schools would be. So that's kind of how that timeline works. And people think it should just be like a 24-hour turnaround after the last interview that happens, but the reality is it's typically about another 4 to 5 days, business days before that actually happens, just because of logistics and phone tag and all those pieces that have to fall into place to make that happen. But we encourage you to keep moving through this process. You guys are in a good time time zone or timeline for your search. You're in a very early search. The candidate pool is going to be very good for your search because of the timing that you're in. But that doesn't mean you want to drag this interview process and negotiation process out, because the candidate pools in the last several years are not as deep as they've traditionally been. So you're going to want to keep moving with your top candidate to try to secure that person. The final step, and it's our last time that we meet with you as part of the search, is we come back and we do what's called an onboarding meeting with the new superintendent and the board. And this can happen anywhere in the spring through early fall. So if you end up hiring a candidate that starts July 1, which would be the most common start date, we will come anytime in June, July, or August to do that onboarding meeting with the candidate. If the candidate can come in June, we'll do it in June. If they can come earlier, we'll do it earlier. But the purpose of that meeting is to prioritize for the candidate and talk about as a board what are the top things that we need to see moving forward in the next 24 months with the candidate, or with the new superintendent. And the other function or purpose of that meeting is to get on the same page with communication and expectations around how the board would like to receive their information, how you want to get your questions answered, how you like to be responded to. We found that that's a really important step because it gets everything on the table, and we help facilitate that conversation to make sure that there's really no questions at the end of that meeting around how do I do some process with this board, or the board asking the new superintendent how they, what they expect of the board. So that's a key step that we feel is vital for your success with this new superintendent. What questions do you have at this point?
Old hat for some.
Yeah, some of it. So I'm going to hand out another document here, which is just a mine. We can take this over that way. So the document that we're putting in front of you is a proposed timeline for this search, and obviously we will adjust this to meet your needs. This was put together with some initial conversations with some board leadership, really late summer, early fall. You reached out to us and said what would be some possible timelines for this. As we put this timeline together, some considerations that we took into account is we know that there was just recently a board election, and there's new board members that will be coming on the board in January. So what we've told boards that are in that situation with new people coming on is we want to try to conduct that characteristics meeting with those new board members involved. So that's a consideration that we put into place here. The other thing that some boards have talked about is moving the search, what we would call earlier in the school year, to try to get it wrapped up before the new board has come on. We've advised boards against that because if you put yourself in a candidate's shoes, being hired by a board that potentially turns over and has 3 or 4 different people on it that are doing your evaluation, let's say later in the school year, is a really awkward situation. And so that's something that we don't want to speed things up just to try to get that person in place. We want to do this right. We want to make sure that everybody has a chance to provide input into that process. So the search that we put together here, as you look at this, as it's laid out here, it's about an 8-week search. We would actually post the position on December 2nd. And then we're already working on phase 2 there, which is the marketing material. Danielle and our assistant in our office have already started putting together that marketing material, so that's going to be well ahead of schedule here, so that'll be ready to go on that December 2nd posting. We have down here as a possible date, January 15th, to conduct the characteristic meetings in the community. As you look in that manual that we were talking about, there's all kinds of examples of schedules. But typically, we come to your community, we spend a day in the community, and then we meet with the board that evening. And that meeting that we spend with you in the evening takes us about an hour to go through the results of the day. If you would like for us to do the online survey, I saw a lot of head nodding earlier, I'm assuming that's something you're going to want. We'll also go through the report of what we've collected in the online survey. So all of that would happen on January 15th, and then in the evening on January 15th is when we go through that prioritizing phase where you define or help us define what are the most important characteristics and qualities you would like to see in the next superintendent. We have down here that January 23rd, all the applications would be completed and submitted to KSB. And then on January 27th, we would work through what we call our final screening. As I mentioned earlier, our whole team of leadership service staff reviews all the applications that are coming in. On the 27th, we do what we call a final screening. We try to pull in 2 superintendents from within your region that have knowledge of your district, some of the things that you're working on within your district. And really what it is we have a whole base of information on every candidate. We put together profiles on every candidate. This is just kind of a final, last objective view of a couple of people outside of our office looking at it to see if there's something that we miss, is what that final screening really is about. We would meet with the board then on January 27th to go through those candidates, all candidates. So we'll go through all the applications that evening. And that evening would be then when you decide who you actually want to interview for your superintendent search. So at the conclusion of our time with you on January 27th, you're going to want to go back into executive session probably as a board and spend some time continuing your conversation on how many and whom, and talk about what you've learned about these candidates. Throughout this whole process, we're a resource to you. So even after we leave that meeting, there's frequently a phone call on the drive home and say, hey, what did you say this person's experience was with X, Y, and Z? Or can you tell me more about this person's experience with X, Y, and Z? That's a fairly common event that happens during that screening process. As I said earlier, when you receive all the applications and we go through all the applications, we're going to spend most of our time that evening with the candidates that we believe are above the line. In other words, those that have the best fit, the qualities and characteristics. If you choose to go back and interview somebody that's not above that line, that's your right to do that. That's your option to do that. We'll tell you everything that we know about anybody you want to interview. So again, we're your resource through that process. What we have down here then is January 29th through February 5th, kind of being a window of time to conduct your interviews. We'll tell you and repeatedly tell you that everybody needs to be present for those interviews. And so at the next board meeting when we come back, if not tonight, you guys really need to block out 4 or 5 days in that window of time that you can come together and do your interviews. And the interviewing, again, is done in the evening typically. It's about a 2 to 3 hour commitment for each of you in each one of those evenings. But it's imperative that you're all here just so when you get to the deliberation standpoint, you all have the same information. You're all having the same conversations based on what you've heard. So here's the point in the evening where you guys need to look at your calendars and give us some feedback. As you look at this timeline, are there questions or things that you would like to see adjusted based on your schedules, your thoughts?
Is this early in the school year to be?
So,
I mean, if we're gonna hire somebody February 5th, you got March, April, May, that superintendent is,
yeah.
that is still on contract with others. I mean,
Yep. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history of Kansas and kind of how things have evolved. I've been doing this 7+ years now. And when I started with KSB 7+ years ago, this would have been considered a ridiculously early search. But the reality is we've had more and more turnover in the superintendent ranks across the state of Kansas. And a lot of retirements it's just a phase we're in right now. And so what's happened is boards have continued to move timelines up in pursuit of getting the best candidate early. We've encouraged boards to not get in such a rush because of what you just said. If you go too early, you're going to limit your candidate pool because nobody really wants to take a job in early January and have 6 more months where they're really just a lame duck superintendent. So that is a challenge that we have, is balancing how do you encourage boards to push the timeline back, but still be in the right timeline or in the right cycle for the superintendent search. Right now in the state of Kansas, there are 16 or 17 searches. So a lot of districts have slid their searches forward just because of that timing. The candidate pools are a little bit more limited in nature. You guys are in a little bit different position because of your region, the size of your district. You're going to be attractive. You won't have some of the constraints on your search process that, let's say, more rural further west districts might have as they go through the search process. But yeah, I would agree it is a little early, but it's also kind of the timelines that everybody is pushing for as boards. We advise boards to decide is what we like to tell folks. And so our advice is your timeline here is solid. I don't think you're going to scare the candidates off by Iowa or February.
When did you guys hire stuff to do?
People, starting the process in February.
So, yeah, this is a couple months ahead.
Yeah.
And that was just based on resignation. Randy resigned in January.
Yeah, what we've seen, just for context, last year at the, I should say last year, started July 1 this year, there were 6 or 7 interim superintendents in place in the state. And that was because of retirements and things that happened in later spring. There were a couple of those where the board ran searches and was not confident or not happy with the candidates that they had. We did a couple of those searches, some of them they pursued on their own. So districts have tried to move forward to try to secure the best candidates. We're in kind of a cycle where the teacher shortage that we've had in Kansas over the last several years has translated to a principal shortage, which eventually translates to a district leadership shortage because there's just fewer people in each of those roles to move into those things.
I know there's not a lot you can do about this, but it would be really nice if we got candidates that needed to work another 10 years before they had their points, because they're at varying stages in Lansing. It's been like a revolving door.
Yes.
And they weren't unhappy with us, and we weren't unhappy with them, but they were at an age where they were, they wanted to make maximum dollars and get out in 3 years. Well, that works good for them, but not for us.
Sure, I completely understand that, and we know that we can't necessarily say how many more years you want to work.
Yeah.
You'll get a feel for that, honestly, though, as you go through, I would hope, as you go through the interview process, and maybe not, but that's something that I think you'll get a sense of as you talk to the candidates. Other questions for us? Timeline questions or any questions?
Are you looking for anything from us tonight?
Basically, just a thumbs up or a confirmation that this timeline will work with you. Kind of the key dates in there that really mean a night for the board are January 15th, because we meet with you that evening. We're in your district that whole day, meeting with different focus groups. And then that January 27th date is also a critical day because that's the date that we come back and meet with you to share candidates. Does anybody see any potential conflicts with those?
Not going to be my call, so I'm trying
Okay.
to like defer.
Yeah.
There's like-
Jeff and Clyde are
Yeah,
there.
really.
Yeah.
So the 15th and the 27th.
Yep.
I mean, the 13th, we have a board meeting.
So that'll be your first board meeting, here, sorry. Welcome. Good? Yeah.
15th, okay then? Okay.
Well, yeah, the clock goes,
Okay.
those 2 dates in, I think, for now. and
Okay.
from there.
So this means the next time that we will be in front of you to visit is the 15th of January. But at any point in the process, if you have questions, you can contact us. Our information is on the bottom of the timeline that we gave you there. If you call the office, you will get me on my cell phone. That they just forward it to my cell phone, so you can call that 1-800 number. You're going to get me any way you can, email or phone call. So some final kind of reminders or next steps for you to start to think about. Number one on that list is look at the interview window that we've given you there, which is January 29th through February 5th. You really need to try to find 4 or 5 nights to block out there. What we tell the board is it's always easier to come back and say, well, we didn't need that night than it is to try to scramble and find another night when 7 people can come together. So not necessarily the night you need to pin that down, but that will be something that you need to, as a board, have some consensus on what dates in that window of time do you want to do the interview.
Is there anything prior to the January board meeting that you're going to need from us?
We will work with the clerk, mostly to develop the schedule of the characteristic groups that we're going to meet. Typically, when we do the focus groups, like on the January 15th date, we'll spend some time with your staff. We'll spend time with classified staff. Students are often a group that we meet with, business leaders in your community. Oftentimes we'll meet with like a site council group or PTO group or booster club group. It's really any group that you want to solicit feedback from in that process. And again, you're going to have that online survey. I'm making an assumption that you want that. We're going to have that online survey out there as another way to receive that information. So that will actually be worked out between Yale.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm not dropping the ball here at the end, so I want to make sure things get.
Yeah, that would probably be one thing that in the next couple of weeks we'll try to pin down with you, what groups you want us to meet with. I'm going to make an assumption you probably have some example schedules of groups that have met with in the past. But there's also example schedules in that book that you can work off of. All we ask is about an hour with each group, and we'll get here as early as you want. And then we need about an hour of time between the last group and the time that we meet with the board to compile results and get the final reports put together on everything. So I'm going to get the online survey also set up for you. And then this is kind of a way down the road, but it sneaks up on boards, is the day of the interviews, or when the candidates come to town to do the interviews, you need to kind of think about who you would like to have show this person around the community and or the school district, or school district and or community. So be thinking about who's a person that can be a great ambassador for our community as well as our school district. It doesn't have to be the same person. Sometimes they get handed off in the middle of the day to a different person to help lead them around. We encourage you to not use a sitting board member because it turns into kind of a private interview by the sitting board member, but if there's a former board member that would be a good resource or a good person to do that, or a former superintendent or employee or a city person that is a great ambassador for your community and your school district. Those are most often who we see kind of chauffeur or drive that person around your community. Typically, when the person gets to the school, they hand the candidate off to the building principal, and that's who gives them the tour of the building. But you're going to want somebody to help be kind of an ambassador to help show that person your community and your schools. So that's something also to be thinking about. And again, it doesn't have to be decided tonight, but it'll sneak up on you in the end of January. I know it sounds ridiculous, it's really that far away. So kind of need to be thinking about who might be that person to do that. Any final questions for us?
I think I speak for everybody. We appreciate all the time and effort that you're putting into this, and that
Either one of us will be a great resource for you. We're looking forward to this process, and I've worked in your district off and on over the last few years. I know you have a great district here, so this will be an enjoyable process for us. So we thank you for this opportunity.
All right, we're going to move to 7.2, got some board policy updates.
We have 3 board policy updates that we can hopefully do approve tonight. This has to do with our September agreement with civil rights. We're going to look at and review our policies and add some additional pieces to our policies from their recommendations. And we worked with the OCR and our KASB attorneys to change current policies. And there's not a lot that we needed to change to come in to meet the agreement through the OCR agreement that we had. And it's the underlying part about after investigating any complaint of racial harassment or discrimination, the district will assess whether the harassment or discrimination has created a hostile environment and to take steps to end the harassment and eliminate the hostile environment. And we added that line to each of those different policies. We're on complaints, KN that we have up, and then also on our policy about racial and disability harassment, and then also the last policy. I gave you both. I took 2 copies. So we have the racial and disability harassment, and we added that line in there. And the last one is for students. We added that part in there also. And that should, we have different steps through that agreement that we'll be updating you as we go. This is the first step of about 7 that we get to go through in order to meet that agreement. So we would ask that you, that's the only thing that changed in the policy. One question that I believe that Jeff did bring up, or maybe it was Jan, and she reviews all of those. We'll also want to make sure that when we review policy again, and they come out, that if this is not something that KSB ends up recommending as part of their large policies, we will want to make sure that we continue to have that in. And that'll be something that Jan and myself will be tasked with, at least for the time being. So, you have any questions about that part?
I move that we approve the board policy updates as presented. Any additional discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
I was there.
All right, 7.3, board self-evaluation goals. I know last board meeting, we stayed afterwards and had a work session and walked through, how many questions were there? 48 questions from a self-evaluation perspective, and came up with 3 that were deemed, that kind of bubble to the top, and then we'll kind of focus and work on staff and personnel relationships and personal development, and some superintendent relations sections. Anybody have any questions, concerns regarding those? It's pretty straightforward. Yeah. All right. Well, I move that we approve the board self-evaluation goals for the 2019 year, 2020 year, as presented.
Second.
Any additional discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Perfect. 7.4, we had a late entry for that. Discuss participating in executive session via remote access or calling in. I know, John, that's an immediate hit for you, but kind of a longer term, how does the board want to do that for other potential circumstances? So I thought I'd bring that up to have a discussion point and figure out what that involves before we go into executive session here in 2-3 minutes.
We've Skyped before.
We've
Not
not
an executive
executive session.
Oh.
We Skype here, kind of like John is dialed in, but everything that we do in executive session is kind of locked down.
I think one of the, this has nothing to do with John one way or another, but the problem that I see is that executive session is kind of a sacrosanct place where we can talk freely and openly and confidentially about personnel, about students, those sorts of things. And when someone is Skyping in or calling in, that security is not there. You don't know who's, when you're have someone calling in, you don't know who's in the room, who can hear through the wall. You don't have any of those kinds of controls. And I think that's not necessarily an issue for any one individual, but I think what we're talking about is setting a precedent. And I think that applies to anyone, whether I need to miss a meeting or someone else needs to miss a meeting. It's not about personalities. It's about that confidentiality piece that you just don't have control over.
I'll echo that as well, Beth. I have concerns about opening up the executive session to that type of an opportunity. It's not something that, in my experience on the board, we've ever done before. And it's just, in my opinion, not advisable in the world we live in today to do that. And there's a lot of legalities and things that are involved in what we can and can't talk about in executive session or outside of executive session. So I would not I don't think it would be a good thing to start to move forward with. That's my opinion.
So how would you inform an absent board member of whatever it was?
It would be the next executive session potential, because that's the only time and place that you have those discussions. We don't have them,
So
we'll
just
talk
catch
about,
them up at the next,
yeah, that's kind of how we've done it in the past. If you know, I think everybody here, I don't know, John, if you've missed the board meeting, but I have this year, and you just kind of, from my perspective, you just, all right, missed, done, and pick it up at a later point.
Well, and I think you trust your fellow board members to handle the matters at hand, as always, and then you'll catch up with them the next time.
I think your point about the legalities is well taken, because virtually everything we talk about in there is personnel on kids. And you don't want that, any of that information being leaked. So that's a good point.
Well, and I think too, as always, out of respect for our staff and the students, you know, they might not want their issue being discussed in that manner.
Mr. Dolby, do you have any?
Well, first of all, Jeff, thanks for adding it to the agenda. You know, Dan and I talked about this for a little bit, and he did talk to KSB, and there is no legal issues, but my going position is whatever really makes the majority most comfortable. I think that there's a level of trust that board members have no matter what, because of whatever information we have, we walk out with it. But I just have enough respect for each of the six of you to support what you guys have to say, and just ask, you know, we look at this as a long-term thing and not something that's just because of John, though I do appreciate you doing that. So I'm going to support whatever the six of you support. And I think that's one of the views of a board, is that it can act without a member. So yes, I was discussing the executive session to help me understand what's going on, but I don't need to, honestly. I trust the other six of you to do the right thing with the information that's presented. It just helps me to be aware of what's going on in the district. So I'm fine either way. I trust you guys, and I just appreciate you for discussing it. Thank you.
What does Coma say about this?
When I called KSB, the attorney that I talked to said that it was really a local board decision if you would want to allow that or not. So I think the Open Meetings Act piece of that would, he didn't mention anything about the legality piece of that. He just said it was your choice. If you wanted to allow that, he said you don't necessarily need a policy for it as much as this is the way that we act procedurally. So,
The board member could just as easily just phone you and ask you what happened.
yes.
So for this piece, I'm looking to, next month, kind of present a policy to help lock that down and understand what we have, because we don't have a policy regarding this. But for tonight's meeting, I'm going to move that we deny remote access into executive session for this meeting. Any additional discussion?
As a part of that motion, is that you want me to look, or is that just a conversation and to work with KSB on a policy for that?
I'll get to that. We'll do that. Do that. No, that's just more for getting in there now.
Got it.
Have a motion? Have a second? Okay. All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Opposed? Said nothing on that?
John, did you oppose or did you agree?
You agree.
I support you guys. Aye.
Got it.
Oh, my sheet's missing. cheat sheet. Thank you. I don't have this memorized yet. Executive session 8.1, I move that we go into executive session to discuss an individual employee's performance, substitute teacher applicants, and personnel changes pursuant to the non-elected personnel exception under COMA, and the open meeting will resume in the boardroom at 8:35. Second. Discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Perfect. We approve the resignations and retirements as presented, the appointments and transfers as presented, and the following supplementals. Haley McCleary as a high school assistant girls soccer coach, and Jamie Mojica as the high school assistant baseball coach.
Second.
Additional discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right. Any additional informations, announcements? We're good on that? Section 9? Talked about everything there. 10.1, future agenda items. We'll have Dan run through the KSB team for the policy regarding executive session pieces, to get a feel for that, and we'll vote on that next, we'll add that to the agenda and vote on that next month. Still need to move to do that, or we're just doing it, just informational?
The only other thing, the high school musical is coming up this week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So, it's a great opportunity. Then the other part, I was going to mention about the KSB trainings and online things. What I might start doing is highlighting one of those every month. They have some online ones, just fire them out to you during our annual week. If you choose to watch them, you choose to watch them, but I think there's some good refreshers there. When you get to see Brian every week, that'd be a great thing. So I'll make sure to send him the video of that.
Move that we adjourn.
Sorry, one thing. Can you make sure that, I would like to ask Ms. Becker to come back with that information with the other school districts on this. She said she would last month.
Yep.
And, I mean.
Do you want her to come back here, or do you want her to send it to you? Or which way would you like it? Because I did think about that also.
I don't know. I'm just, I mean, I've talked to one other district. I'd just like to see, this is very concerning to me.
Okay.
It really is, and the numbers that we're producing, and it's just, it's concerning, and I'd like to see where we stand, at least in the county, the 5 to 8.
Okay. Well, we
Just
can,
next month.
okay,
That's fine. On that.
next month on the agenda,
Yeah,
or
she,
through end of the week, and maybe both.
either way.
Okay. We'll get it.
Okay.
Anything else? Move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?